tape. Joe Hipp, you will see, is 6 years older than Tommy Morrison, but that 223 pounds, Alex, as I said, the lightest Hipp has ever fought.
Yeah, and Joe says he didn't diet then, although we all know how successful diets can be, some diets, but he says he got the weight off by working it off, and it makes him as confident as he's ever been. We'll see if that affects his power. The rules today are the Nevada state rules. Scoring is on the 10-point must system. The 3 knockdown rule is in effect. The standing 8 count is not. A fighter cannot be saved by the bell except in the final round, and only the referee can stop the fight. And the referee today is Vic Draculich from here in Nevada, and he calls the 2 fighters to the center of the ring.
Dressing room, are there any questions? Any questions from Chief Seconds? All right, remember, obey my commands, protect yourselves at all times. Touch gloves now, let's get to them.
Dan, just quickly before the bell, one fact that is important here, Tommy Morrison has never been past 6 rounds. He tired dramatically against Mercer. The question is, can Joe Hipp avoid Tommy's power, especially the left hook, get through the early rounds, and take Tommy Morrison into the late rounds and test him, see how his endurance is?
We're not expecting much of a feeling out process here. These are 2 fighters that predominantly like to fight straight ahead.
One thing about Joe Hipp, as you see right away, he is a southpaw, very rare in the heavyweight division. Tommy Morrison had a lot of trouble with the southpaw, a Soviet southpaw. Came back to knock him out, but was behind on all cards when he did. That was a different style southpaw. That was a cutie. Joe Hipp is anything but a cutie. And even at 223, Joe Hipp is not going to be a twinkle toes out there.
You're referring to Yuri Volin, who he fought back in April of 1991. That was actually on the Holyfield Foreman undercard.
Good body punch by Morrison. The left hook up top is his best punch, but his body punch is also, when he uses it, a telling punch, and especially you would want to test somebody who looks as soft around the middle as Joe Hipp.
Well, Tommy Morrison, as we're well aware, has been hit before, but when his punches land, they just sound different than most fighters. He is just an impact puncher.
And the other thing, Dan, is everybody points out, well, he's had 32, has-beens and never was for opponents except for Mercer. And he knocked 28 of them out, big deal. But the fact is how he moved them. What happened when he hit him? He just explodes when he lands.
Right uppercut. Went right between the gloves of Hipp and almost connected. Both of those blows by Hipp landed on Morrison's gloves.
Already you see a little swelling on Joe Hipp. And he just got hit with a Tommy Morrison jab. That is not a good sign. Because,
well, look where he's got his gloves, Alex, yes, below his chin.
Right, and especially the right.
And he doesn't have the hand speed to pick off those jabs. Right. Oh, another jab lands by Morrison.
Tommy said he has to learn how to not rely exclusively on his power. It might work for him at the lower levels of boxing, well, not at the top. There's the hook.
A good sweeping left hook. A slow right hand by Joe Hipp allowed that one to come over the top, and you saw it landed flush.
Might have noticed a knee brace on Joe's right knee. That is not any current injury. It was an old football injury that he just wears it just to prevent further injury.
He said he never even had an operation. It's just more psychological than anything else. Tommy Morrison did tire badly in the Mercer fight, although you get the impression that it wasn't so much from lack of conditioning. He's a tense fighter, Alex. He just is one of those people that every punch he seems to throw like it's his last.
Well, he says, Dan, that it was the stress of hitting Mercer with some of the best punches he ever threw and seeing Mercer still standing there that he panicked. And that happens to a lot of fighters. I think Mike Tyson admitted it happened to him against Quick Tillis the first time he had to go the distance. But the fact of the matter is, I think also that Ray Mercer started to punch back in that 4th round. And I think those punches might have had more effect on Tommy than Tommy's admitted to us and even to himself.
We're inside the final 10 seconds here in the 1st round. This fight is scheduled for 10. Tommy Morrison and Joe Hipp. Stay with us.
My brother.
The bell rings and away we go in the 2nd round here at Bally's in Reno. That's Tommy Morrison on the left of your screen, circling to the top.
And another nice jab from Morrison. I mean, that's a punch. He wants to prove to himself that he can be a boxer, that he can be more than just a one-dimensional fighter.
And Joe Hipp is eating it with regularity.
Yeah, Joe's available for the punch. I think I'd keep throwing it too.
Again, Morrison scores with a jab.
And Joe swelling, especially on the right eye, which is real dangerous because that's...
A spectacular combination by Morrison, a pair of jabs and then a right. And for some reason, Joe Hipp is carrying his gloves low and is just, as Alex said, making himself available.
We talked to Joe about, you know, Joe, how are you going to avoid Morrison's power? And he says, I got to block it. I got to keep my right hand up to avoid the left. He just hasn't done it.
No, from a hand speed survey of what we've seen here as we move into the second round here, it's clearly Tommy Morrison who's the possessor of the quicker hands.
Quicker hands, more power. The only question about Tommy, as we said, if he doesn't, you know, if Joe stands up as he's doing now, and if Joe doesn't puff up so much that the doctor or the referee have to stop the fight, will Tommy be able to keep this pace up? Right now, it's a very measured pace. You know, he's not exerting himself. He's not going wild. First backward step that Tommy Morrison has taken.
Here in the second round, we have less than 1:30 remaining on the Russ Tough clock. Second round here between Tommy Morrison and Joe Hipp.
Joe Hipp just kind of fell into a right to the body there. He came inside with a scoring left hand and got out of the way of Tommy Morrison's punch coming back, which he hasn't done much of.
There's Tommy Burgetts in the corner, who is the trainer of Tommy Morrison, co-trainer along with John Brown
and a conditioning expert.
Yes.
Somebody who's worked very hard to get Tommy in condition, mentally and physically. And obviously, after a loss like the Mercer loss, the mental part is perhaps even more important. Hipp a little bit more active here. Not as much coming back from Tommy Morrison. Awkward right hand by Hipp.
Yeah, he tried to get inside after Morrison had sailed over the top.
One thing that you notice with Joe Hipp, when he does jab, which isn't often, but when he does, he brings his jab back low, and that's just suicidal against the Tommy Morrison. You saw Joe Hipp look over the referee. Like, hey, pal, I'm in here trying to get the job done. Don't bother me.
Well, with that left hand of Hipp as it came in, just a ponderous swing. Tommy Morrison under control and very measured here as we come to the end of the second round. Joe Hipp is already starting to show the outward signs of being in a heavyweight fight. Tommy Morrison is unscathed for a good reason. Joe Hipp has really not landed a good, solid punch effectively the entire fight yet. As we move now into the start of the round number 3. The jab of Morrison has been very successful. We're here at 4,500 feet, roughly, in elevation here in Reno, and Tommy Morrison, for one, changed his training. He went to Colorado Springs to the Air Force Academy. Normally, he trains at Virginia Military Institute at a lower altitude. Good work inside here by the two fighters. But Bill Caton, the manager of Tommy Morrison, was very upset with Morrison for training in Kansas City for the Ray Mercer fight. Alex thought there were far too many distractions.
Yeah, Tommy admits now that he's going to fight camp, which he never did before, that Caton was right. That's all part of the way that Tommy Morrison has reacted to the loss. I mean, do you learn from it? Do you get better? Good left and a right downstairs by Morrison.
Morrison is throwing in combination. He's following that jab up, which is what you have to do.
One thing you have to say, although Joe Hipp is puffing up, Dan, we're in round 3, and he hasn't looked close to being hurt. I thought the best punch, there you see Pete Roybal, his trainer. I thought the worst Joe looked was when Tommy scored a solid punch to his belly. He seemed to double over. And,
in the first round,
right?
At the beginning
and Tommy really has not gone back to that.
Well, swelling and bleeding is nothing new to Joe Hipp. He does it with regularity. So maybe we're more concerned about it than is he.
Yeah, but the time Joe had a shot at a big fight against Bert Cooper, that was really decisive. He was in the fight, but his eyes just closed shut, so shut that they had to stop the fight in a TKO in the 5th round.
We want to remind our local ABC stations that at the end of this round, we're going to take a station break. That, by the way, the Bert Cooper fight, the same night that Tommy Morrison was knocked out by Ray Mercer.
Good thumping body punch by Joe Hipp there. See Joe trying to counter.
A sweeping
backing
move
up, giving ground.
You know, that move by Morrison, Alex, took him off balance, and Hipp was too slow to take advantage of it.
A feint there, kind of an awkward feint, but you saw one good thing. There's a good sign. Tommy Morrison had his right up to pick off the Joe Hipp left hand coming out of the break. Never back straight out with your hands down. Tommy backed straight out, but he had one hand up.
This is the end of the third round. We'll return with more of ABC's Wide World of Sports after this word from our ABC stations. Alex Swallow, we're ringside for a 10-round heavyweight fight between Tommy Morrison, who's on the left of your screen, and Joe Hipp to the right.
And for the first time in the fight, a little blood was drawn, and interesting, it was on Tommy Morrison, under his left eye.
We're in the fourth round, as I said. The first 3 rounds, not totally dominated by Morrison in the sense that he hurt Joe Hipp, but I think, Alex, obviously winners on the scorecard for Morrison.
That's right. I think that's exactly right.
Joe Hipp was born in Browning, Montana, grew up in Yakima, Washington, and there's his wife, Barbara. And
Barbara knows how important this fight is also.
We won't be hearing many pro-Morrison quips from Barbara today. It is hard not to like the Hipps. Good, solid people.
Joe Hipp is as likable a guy as there is in boxing. Soft-spoken, just a terrific guy.
And I'm wondering why we bothered to put a microphone on Barbara. We could hear her without it. Joe Hipp, from a hand speed category, is several notches below Tommy Morrison, but he's game.
But now he's also, as opposed to the early rounds, he's backing Tommy Morrison up. He's coming forward very, very slowly, but he is coming forward. Whether that's just Tommy Morrison wanting to draw him onto his punch, we'll find out. The key thing, I think, Dan, is that Tommy has not been dominant, as you pointed out. He has not exhibited. He's shown some of his punches, but they haven't had the effect they've had on some of the lesser opponents.
So Joe Hipp score a good left to the midsection of Morrison. Again, a reminder, if you just joined us, that Joe Hipp is a southpaw fighter, only the second that Morrison has faced professionally. And, of course, facing a right-hander is nothing new. Hey, there's a good combination by Joe Hipp.
The best sequence in the fight for Joe Hipp.
And the left landed right on Morrison's chin. 45
seconds to go in round 4, and now you have to have questions about Tommy Morrison standing.
Oh, another left hand by Hipp.
And he responded with a big left.
He sure did. You saw Morrison come in with it. And to say the tempo is picked up would be an understatement. But Joe Hipp, you can see it in his eyes.
And a big cut on the right eye of Tommy Morrison.
Senses that he has hurt Morrison, and Alex is right. Look at the blood come down the right cheek of Morrison from his right eyebrow. Well, things have become interesting here in the closing moments of the fourth round.
Tommy Morrison holding on, trying to recover.
The end of the fourth. We are scheduled for 10, and this thing just got fun. Just got fun.
Not long ago at Subway.
The medical report card on Morrison, he has a mouse under his left eye, but a cut over his right eye on the outside of the eyebrow.
And more important than the cut was how vulnerable he looked to a guy in Joe Hipp, who really, as big as he is not a power puncher, Dan. He's really kind of an arm puncher.
Oh, great uppercut by Morrison.
And the first one we've seen.
Oh, and a right to the chin puts Joe Hipp down. Hipp is up, beats the count. Draculich asking him if he can go on. That was a good, solid right uppercut, and then a right to the chin by Morrison.
From a man who's supposed to be
a right hand by Hipp, Alex.
From somebody who's supposed to be a left hooker. He's using his right hand better than we've seen.
We're in the fifth round, a little over 2 minutes.
And you notice Joe Hipp is not holding on. And he really hasn't gone in the survival mode. I mean, he kind of looks like a guy who's looking to throw punches back. He's busted up in the mouth.
Yep, Hipp bleeding from the mouth. Oh, and Tommy Morrison, a double right hand. And Joe Hipp better protect himself.
Now we'll see if Tommy Morrison can finish him. If he's got enough left. He looked tired in the fourth. Another half hook, half uppercut with the right hand by Tommy Morrison.
And Hipp better put himself, Alex, in more of a defensive mode. As you say, either by hanging on. And Tommy Morrison, a double right hand. You see Hipp look over at Draculich, and I don't know why.
I think he might have thought the punch went around a little bit in the back of him. Rabbit punch, maybe. Joe's looking for anything right now. He's looking for a bell, and he's got a minute 20 till he gets there, and his mouth is open. He is a brave, game fighter, Joe Hipp.
And Tommy Morrison is becoming more deliberate here.
Yes, and this is interesting. He's taking his time because I think he remembers back to the Mercer fight when he had Mercer hurt and punched himself out. He is clearly pacing himself.
And that was a scoring left hand by Hipp. Ooh, and an off-balance combination by Hipp that does nothing. Inside a minute remaining here in the 5th. And I wasn't sure we were going to get to this point. Morrison knocked down Hipp in the early stages of this round, and it almost looked like Hipp wasn't going to beat the count, but he did. Alex, can Morrison be deliberate to a fault?
Well, you know, he knows his body a lot better than we do, and he might sense that he was getting real tired. I mean, he expended a lot of energy, and he may be right. He may be exhausted right now and looking to let his tank fill up a little bit. It's a great thing for Joe Hipp, allowed him to survive this round, and it looked for a moment like there's no way he could.
This fight is scheduled for 10. This is the halfway mark.
Find your mic on Rust.
I hate.
Knocked down in round 5. Watch the right hand from Morrison. Shows the left, and then boom, like almost a right hook. It was not a straight right hand. It put Joe Hipp down.
But the scoring uppercut by Morrison just prior to that is what really softened up Joe Hipp, who is bleeding a great deal from the mouth. And Alex and I were both talking to each other during that commercial break about the admiration we have for Joe Hipp. It would have been easy to not get up, Alex, after being knocked down.
You know, he's a game guy. He knows this is a huge fight for him. If he can somehow get in the late round, somehow have Tommy Morrison just faint from exhaustion, I mean, it just changed his whole life. And he's fighting as though it depended upon it.
Good left hand by Joe Hipp.
One interesting thing, Dan, Tommy Morrison has never scored a knockout past this point in round 6. He was knocked out, but he's never scored one after the 6th round. I'm sorry, after the 5th round.
I was going to say, he's never gone beyond the 6th round.
That's right.
As hard as that is to believe for a man who has had 33 professional fights, Tommy Morrison has never seen the 7th round of a professional fight.
Scoring left hand from Joe Hipp there. Not much coming back from Tommy Morrison. He is clearly, another left hand from Joe Hipp.
Boy, and that one was right there. And you can see it has backed up Morrison. Oh, and another good combination and a retaliation by Morrison. But a good pair of punches by Joe Hipp. And I'm sure Tommy Morrison right now is thinking to himself, my life would be a lot simpler if this man would have stayed down after I put him down.
This is Tommy Morrison at this point. Could change any moment. At this point, he's in a survival mode. His mouth is open. He is very tired, and he's waiting for a second win.
Well, he won't get a break for a minute. 1 minute remaining here in the 6th.
Oh, those combinations that he just tried and fell short were pathetic. I mean, he was just pushing him. Look, there's no snap. There's nothing on his punches at all. We're just past the halfway point in this fight. And the power that Tommy Morrison has in the early rounds, he has not, at this stage, been able to carry here into round 6. But Joe Hipp knows, and we should know, that it can come back in a flash at any moment.
Joe Hipp has been the aggressor here in the 6th. He has apparently stemmed that flow of blood from his mouth. There's a good right hand by Morrison, but while it scored, it didn't look to do much damage. Facially, Joe Hipp really doesn't look much the worse for wear, Alex, and he did say after the 3rd round, although there is some noticeable swelling in that right eyelid. Here we come to the end of round number 6. Joe Hipp has fought into the 10th round on 2 separate occasions. Tommy Morrison is on ground where he has never been before. In the 7th round of a professional fight. And he looked spent at the end of the 6th. He opens up the 7th here with crisper punches.
I'm amazed at Tommy. I mean, I don't know if anything's wrong with his left hand. He has not really scored with that left hook. He's used the jab, the left hook just has not been a factor.
And remember that early in his career, he was just a one-punch fighter, and it was the left hook. It was devastating.
And really a thing of beauty, just a natural hook. He just hasn't thrown it. And Joe Hipp is inviting. I mean, the right hand's down.
I don't know what Joe Hipp is thinking with his arms that low.
That's good hips, Tom. Keep
Unless he
hips
is
long.
taking a Rocky Balboa strategy and saying, hit me. I'm not sure you have enough to take me out, but it didn't look that way in the 5th when he was on the seat of his pants.
Clearly, Sylvester Stallone and Joe Hipp have different personal trainers, but at least they were both, Rocky Balboa and Joe Hipp were both southpaws, so there are some similarities.
That's right. Again, a reminder that knee brace on the right leg of Joe Hipp is nothing current. It just goes back to his high school football days, and he really wears it more for comfort than anything else.
Again, Hipp coming forward. Morrison not throwing many meaningful punches. One right hand at the opening bell that really was hard, but look there. I mean, that's just, he's not planning himself. He's bouncing and trying to punch at the same time. Good right hand there.
Yeah, a good right hand counter by Morrison. And Joe Hipp, his right eye is definitely starting to swell to the point where I'm not sure if it's impairing his vision. It's safe to say it's not helping his vision any. And of course, that's from whence the left jab comes, that jab of Morrison's that he scored easily with and often with early in the fight. Inside a minute here in the 7th.
I mean, based upon Tommy Morrison's record, especially with Mercer, you'd have to say that, you know, the big thing is it appears the problem, good combination by Hipp. You have to say Morrison's biggest problem is stamina, is endurance, but also in his record is difficulty with one southpaw, and it could be that Tommy's just having trouble solving the southpaw stance. But we have to point out, I mean, Joe Hipp is just standing right in front of him. I mean, it's just, and he's not a defensive fighter, clearly. It's just hard to believe that a guy who is as stationary and as slow and as right in front of you as Joe Hipp is could give Tommy Morrison this much difficulty simply by standing up to his power.
Well, Tommy Morrison told us that he's always been a straight-ahead fighter. It's the only way he knows how to fight. He said, I need to work on fighting moving backwards. Well, he is certainly getting that work here in the last several rounds, because Joe Hipp has got Tommy Morrison on his heels and moving backwards here at the end of the 7th.
Iron Mike on Rust.
I hate Rust.
Iron Mike.
Welcome back to Reno. We move now into the 8th round in this fight between Tommy Morrison there on your left, Joe Hipp on your right. And remember, this is scheduled for 10, not 12 rounds. This is a 10-round bout. And Alex, right now, I would love to have a peek at the judges' scorecards.
Yeah, well, I can't do that, Dan, but I can peek at my scorecard. I've got Tommy Morrison ahead by 2 points. I gave him the first 3 rounds, Hipp the 4th, Morrison a 2-point 5th round, 10-8, and Joe Hipp the 6th and the 7th, the last 2 rounds.
That's exactly the way I see it.
So Morrison's ahead, but the trend right now is to Joe Hipp. And Tommy Morrison has to find a way to win a round or 2 to make sure he wins this decision.
And the trend of the last couple rounds continues with Joe Hipp being the stalker. Now, certainly Tommy Morrison, we're not implying that he's finished or anything like that. But this is a different stance that Morrison has used in the past. And of course, again, we have to remind you that every minute that goes by is a minute in a professional fight that he has not seen.
Tommy Morrison is used to being the stalker. Right now, Tommy Morrison is being stalked. He is trying to survive.
To give you an illustration.
Good uppercut by Joe Hipp.
A good uppercut by Hipp. A reminder here, you know, in the last 3 years, Tommy Morrison has fought 12 fights, a total of 33 rounds. That's less than 3 rounds per fight. We'd like to remind our local ABC stations that at the end of this round, we will be taking a station break.
Joe Hipp doing all the work. Good scoring response there by Morrison.
And really, you wonder how many of those would be picked off if Joe Hipp would only carry his gloves a little higher. Because he does not have the hand speed to pick off that jab. And you can see that Morrison just reacting to Hipp throwing the right by coming right back with the left.
Oh, good, solid.
Good right hand to the ribs. And there was a good scoring combination by Joe Hipp.
And a good elbow to the throat by Joe Hipp.
He was a football player.
Forearm shiver. Oh, you saw there how awkward and really unpolished a fighter Joe is. I mean, is he just kind of plodded in and missed the right hand? Missed that. But the fact of the matter is, Joe Hipp right now is a fresher fighter, and that really is the story of the fight. And it looks like, based upon this round and the last two before it, that unless Tommy Morrison does get a second or third win or whatever he's looking for, that Joe Hipp could just walk into him, as limited as Joe Hipp is, and just on the basis of superior endurance, can win this fight. We should point out also, Joe Hipp is an 11-1 underdog.
We'll return with more of ABC's Wide World of Sports after a word from our ABC staff.
Now, take it.
The beginning of the 9th round of a fight scheduled for 10. There is Joe Hipp on the right of your screen, Tommy Morrison on the left. Our unofficial scorecards here at ringside have this a 1-point fight in favor of Morrison. And of course, Joe Hipp, an American Indian born in Browning, Montana. His mother, a member of the Blackfeet, and what a sense of pride must be moving through the reservation where Joe was born. Grew up in Yakima, Washington. Lives now outside Seattle, and he is on the verge of possibly doing something that not many people gave him credit or having a chance, Alex. He went off here today at revolving around a 10-1 underdog in this fight against Tommy Morrison.
I think the final price was 11-1. He is a very live underdog.
Yes.
And he was not, he said, I mean, you never know, Joe said, I don't mind being an underdog. I was an underdog through all my early fights. When people just looked at me and said, this guy doesn't look like a fighter. Joe said, no one who ever fought me said afterwards that I wasn't a fighter.
There has to be
Tough
concern
guy.
in the corner of Tommy Morrison. There's John Brown, his co-manager and trainer. And yes, that is a concerned look. And you see Joe Hipp scored with an uppercut, and Morrison came back with a left. But this crowd here in Reno has definitely swung over Joe Hipp in favor of Hipp, and again, Alex, he scores.
They're jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah. Well, on our scorecards, Alex, if one of these fighters wins the 9th and wins the 10th, on our card, he'll win the fight. Again, a reminder that we are not the official scorers. There are 3 of them here at ringside. Scoring is on the 10-point must.
All Joe Hipp right now, pretty much all the scoring.
4 minutes of boxing left. This is the final minute of the 9th.
Wide open the mouth of Tommy Morrison, absolutely exhausted. Nothing but that jab. That, I mean, you know, he is got a little bit of snap in the jab, but that's just not enough to keep Joe Hipp off him. And now
blood?
Morrison's cutting the mouth.
Blood from the mouth of Morrison.
From that mouth that's been wide open for so long,
and that's
he's all busted up.
And that's how it gets cut. You can't fight with your mouth open. Oh, a good right hand by Morrison, and that hurts Joe Hipp. Joe Hipp is in trouble. Joe Hipp is down. A right hand from Tommy Morrison staggers Joe Hipp.
Hey.
It stops the fight. And Tommy Morrison summons the power today, and it saves him in the 9th round. Joe Hipp got up right at the count of 10, and Vic Draculich did not even determine whether or not he thought he could go on. He didn't beat the count, and the fight was stopped.
You hear some boos as Tommy Morrison takes his bow. 2:47, the official time of round number 9, and I promise you that I will get the scorecards to let you know if Tommy Morrison needed that knockout to win this fight.
Yeah, wouldn't we all like to know? Tommy Morrison into the rounds where he had never been before.
And a heartbroken Joe Hipp.
Yes. Here it is, Alex.
The full angle. The left missed. The right hand landed. And that right hand really hurt Joe Hipp, much more than it looked.
Yep. You saw his legs just
and another right. Boy, the right hand doing almost all the damage. That uppercut missed, but Joe was just not in a position to defend himself and went down.
Alex, I'm not sure he would have survived the first right hand. Watch the right hand. Here, next punch. Right there.
Boom.
I don't think Joe Hipp, I don't think he would have
chopping
recovered.
punch. Let me just go through the scorecards that we have right here. Official scorecards. Keith McDonald had it 76-75 Morrison. Doug Tucker, 76-75 Hipp. Herb Santos, 76-75. Morrison. The fight's still up for grabs. 2 judges with Morrison ahead by a point, 1 judge with Hipp ahead by a point.
As you can see, it was a devastating right uppercut from Tommy Morrison at 2:47 of the 9th round. We'll be back here to Reno, hopefully to talk to both fighters. They've got a lot to say. Stay with us. We'll be back here in just a moment.
Tommy, congratulations. It looked to us at ringside that you were on the verge of defeat, that you were exhausted, that he was coming on, winning the middle rounds and the late rounds, and that you needed a knockout to win. How tired were you, and in your mind, where did you stand in this fight?
Well, one of the main things that we did, right in the second round, I broke my jaw and I hurt my right hand in the 4th round. One of the reasons that I moved around and managed to jab. So we learned 2 things today, and that's face adversity, to be able to overcome it, and also we got some rounds that we needed to learn to keep our mouths shut. So there's a lot of learning experience come out of this fight. Looking forward to some of the next fight. I think I learned a lot from this. Joe Hipp is one of the hardest punches I've ever fought. Very tough guy, very courageous, and I take my hat off to him.
Tommy, it seemed to us that you threw very few hooks, that actually the damage you did were with the right hand that you say you injured. Right. Why so few hooks? Was it his southpaw stance?
Well, I think the southpaw kind of threw me off a little bit. He's also in a low position. The hook seemed to come right over his head, so I a few times tried to jab and drop low and come up with a left uppercut, which is a punch of ours that we still need to develop some more. But luckily, because of our last 4 fights, we showed everybody that we do have a right hand, that we have added more to our arsenal. So I look at it as a plus. I got hit a little bit too much. Defense is something that we felt like we always had to work on, something that hasn't been a secret, so we're real happy about it.
Well, you came through it, Tommy, with a late round knockout. Congratulations to you. Thanks very much for talking to us. Let's go back to Dan Dierdorf at ringside.
Okay, thank you, Alex, and we'll return to talk to Joe Hipp, but now it's time for our regular feature on what's new in the world of sports science and technology.
Sports and science converge.
Underdog, 11-1 underdog. Joe, you said despite those odds, you were very confident coming into this fight, and for a while it looked like you had good reason to be.
Yeah, I was very confident. I took his best shot. He just caught me in the end. Just couldn't do nothing about that. But we're still here, and we'll keep on working.
Do you have any quarrel with the referee's decision to end it?
Well, I thought I was getting up. I don't know. I ain't the referee, so it's up to his job. I felt good, though, once I got up. I thought I was up by 10, but I don't know.
Joe, from your point of view, you wanted to win the fight. You're in a position to win the fight. I had you ahead by a couple of points. One judge had you ahead 1 point. The other had you within a point. But this really has to be a loss that you can build on in terms of your career. You've proved something about yourself. I mean, do you feel that way?
Well, yeah. I got hit in I was in the 2nd or 3rd round, went down, but I got right back up. My heart's in it. I wish you wouldn't have stopped it because I was a tip-on fight, and I think the fight would have went for full 10 rounds. I would have won the decision. But I got a little lazy, and he caught me with a good punch.
How much of a problem was the right eye? Could you see out of it?
Oh, I can see fine. It was just a little swelled, but I squint all the time anyway.
It was a terrific performance, Joe. Thanks very much for talking to us. Congratulations to you. Let's go back now to Dan Dierdorf at ringside.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Tommy Morrison moves to 33-1 with that knockout, and that's it for us here in Reno. For Alex Swallow, I'm Dan Dierdorf, and all of our ABC crew, thanks for being with us. It's been a fun year. This is our final fight of the season. Now we'll rejoin Al Michaels at Hollywood Park after this commercial.